Alright, so I did my presentation on morality and appearance and how it relates to horror media. A person who has good thoughts cannot ever be ugly. You can have a wonky nose and a crooked mouth and a double chin and stick-out teeth. But if you have good thoughts, they will shine out of your face like sunbeams and you'll always look lovely. Roald Dahl's The Twits. Before we get started, I'd like to define some terms, just so we're all on the same page. Our first term is morality, and this is used to refer to a code of conduct put forward by a society, group, or by all rational people, as defined by Stanford's philosophy program. Beauty, for the purposes of this video, shall be defined as what is considered appealing by all conventional standards, meaning what society thinks is ideal. Moral goodness is the adherence to what is considered moral, or in other words, adherence to morality. In terms of history, for morality, we see a heavy emphasis in religion. In medieval times, it would have been things like Christianity and Catholicism. Before that, it would have been things like Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, etc. And in modern day, we still see a heavy religious influence, but we do start to see a basis in science as well. In terms of beauty, we see this associated with health, wealth, and reproduction. For example, the first humans had a very heavy emphasis on fertility. We see that in the Venus statues, or Venus figurines, as pictured below. And these were figurines meant to represent fertility, and they had the breasts, butt, and belly enlarged, because these were associated with fertility and reproduction. In medieval times, we see that large figures were preferred because this meant the person was well fed and had the wealth to feed themselves, and it was often associated with royalty. So when we say wealth, we also tend to include royalty in this. In modern day, we see a preference for skinny figures as we associate this with health. But we also see this sort of emphasis between morality and appearance in media. In The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, we follow our protagonist, Dorian Gray, as he gets his portrait painted, which leads to him sort of treasuring his youth and wanting to preserve that. And we see the portrait in the story being used to demonstrate his morality and what he should be looking like. We follow Dorian through a series of controversies and scandals and whatnot. And throughout it all, we see the portrait sort of change to reflect what Dorian should be looking like while Dorian remains youthful. At the end of the story, Dorian wants to become good, and he sees this portrait as a blockage to that, so he stabs the painting, but in doing so, he swaps the image in the painting with himself. And so when the police find him, they see this painting of what Dorian looked like from the time his portrait was painted, up until his death. But on the floor is what Wilde describes as a sort of loathsome and withered figure. And this sort of emphasizes how Dorian can't escape his morality, or immorality rather. And then we have the case of Nightmare on Elm Street, which is sort of following our protagonist, Nancy, and sort of her interaction with Freddy Krueger through this sort of dream world where if you get hurt or killed in the dream world, you die in real life. And when Freddy is revealed to Nancy, there's a lot of things in the mise-en-scene that sort of emphasize that he's the villain. Besides the fact that he's given this horrific appearance, anytime he's shown, his face is shrouded in shadow, and there's this mess of just sort of like pipes and cloth and wires and railings and whatnot surrounding our protagonist, which gives us this trap sensation, making it feel like Freddy is this thing we should be escaping, which only serves to emphasize that he is our villain. In the Journal of Women and Aging, Anna Patricia Hilario studied how terminally ill patients dealt with a altered physical appearance, and she found that our physical appearance is a social currency, and when we begin to deviate from social standards and beauty standards, we begin to face discrimination. Vivian Jarrett says that discrimination comes from being seen as dangerous, unintelligent, and unclean, and usually when we see unclean, we associate it with immoral. And in Jing Wang's study, she found that physical beauty influenced others' judgment of morality, and vice versa, where when we know someone's character, we begin to see them in a different physically. And so essentially what we see from this is as we get closer to conventional beauty standards, the more likely we're to be seen as morally good. In the case of Jerry Dandridge and Ted Bundy, we have a sort of different story almost. Jerry Dandridge is a vampire from Fright Night, and he's considered a very attractive villain. But his attractiveness is used to give him this redemptive character arc in fan fiction and fan culture. Like, just scrolling through fan fiction sites, if you search up Jerry Dandridge and Fright Night, we see this sort of mysterious bad boy player kind of character, and the love interest as this sort of character that's used to redeem Jerry Dandridge. But we also see this sort of ideology in real life as well. In the case of Ted Bundy, who's a serial killer that killed over 30 people, he used his charm and good looks to make him seem trustworthy. And in Netflix's Conversations with a Killer, the Ted Bundy tapes, there was a huge influx on social media of people saying that they would date Ted Bundy or let him kill them. And when we compare this to Freddy Krueger, we see that this difference in appearance leads to different fan reception. Now, there are several arguments and implications here. We have the projectivist argument where appearance is relevant to morality, and that when we see someone's appearance, we sort of project our own moral standards onto them, and this leads to the idea of good and bad appearance. However, universal norms become impossible to sort of figure out because appearance varies so vastly between cultures. We have a mismatch argument as well, where appearance is out of one's control, but this ignores how knowing someone's character can impact our sort of perception of their physical appearance, and vice versa, where someone's appearance impacts our perception of their physical or of their morality. And then we have the danger argument, where appearance relevant morality is at the root of destructive social trends such as racism, sexual objectification, etc. And while this may be true, it's unclear as to whether or not appearance relevant to morality is the cause or the result of these destructive social trends. And then we have the appropriateness argument, where these virtues of social appropriateness, or in other words, these sort of social standards in terms of appearance and conforming to these social standards is relevant to morality. However, this doesn't acknowledge disability or disfigurements that people might have, and it also ignores our changing social standards and changing morals. And then we have the concomitance argument, where good and bad character leads to different emotions, which results in a change in appearance, and this relies on what the person judges to be morally good or bad. So if we have a serial killer who gets joy and satisfaction from killing someone, they might feel a positive emotion from killing someone and look better because of it, whereas just your normal everyday person might feel horrible guilt and look worse from killing someone. And then again, this also ignores disabilities and disfigurements that a person might have, because while our appearance can change based off of our emotions, that's not the sole factor in our appearance. So in conclusion, we can see that appearance does have an impact on our perception of morality and our when knowing someone's character, that also has an impact on our perception of their appearance, although that seems to be less sort of impactful when compared to appearance on morality. And we also see this in horror media, which means that we can use horror media to both demonstrate and measure these changing moral standards and beauty standards